Former Secretary of State for the Department of International Development, thanks very much for being with us. You're a great defender of aid generally, and we will come to this week's cuts specifically in a moment. But first, I wondered, what do you make of Sam's thesis that Britain itself benefits more if we spend this money on other things?
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
And may I say straight away how flattered and honoured I am that Sam remembers an article I wrote more than 10 years ago. And the case that he quite rightly put from that article, I believe, remains the same today, because the balance of his argument is that the nature of the threat has changed since then. Now we have a threat from Russia and China. Then we had a different sort of threat, Afghanistan and Iraq. But the truth is that the threats to our country, and I greatly applaud the increase in defence spending, which is very important indeed. But the threats to our country require soft power and hard power in order to mitigate and defeat them. And, you know, instead of it being Iraq or Afghanistan, it is now Syria, it is the Middle East, it is Somalia. And I want to give you a very specific example as to why I would like to contest Sam's case. And it is this. Back in 2012, we decided that, having put a lot of British money into stemming a famine in Somalia and in the Horn of Africa, we decided that we should try and do something about the stability of Somalia, because it was ungoverned space. It was a source of terrorism. And at that point, there were more British passport holders training in Somali terrorist camps than there were in Afghanistan or in Pakistan. And so we realized that if we could do something about that ungoverned space, bring our development expertise and indeed some British money and a lot of other money as well to bear, we might be able to change Somalia, make it less terrorist-ridden, and ensure that girls and women particularly weren't subject to the barbaric treatment which was so prevalent in Somalia in those days. And through British expertise and British leadership particularly, whisper it not too loudly, Somalia today is in a much lesser threat to the streets of Birmingham and London, certainly a great deal less than it was then. And it's also a better place for girls and women to live. And that is a result of the active engagement of Britain's development effort, bringing to bear British expertise, some military guidance and help as well, and a lot of Foreign Office support. And, you know, global Britain works best when it brings together defence, diplomacy and development. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so sad that DFID has been completely dismantled. And being no doubt about this, when Mrs. Thatcher was Prime Minister, there was a Department for Development within the Foreign Office in a separate building with its own minister. All of that has gone. The entirety of DFID has been dismantled. With it will go a lot of its expertise, and now we're dismantling the money. And it means we will be much less effective, and we can come on to other reasons as to why this is wrong if you give me the chance later in the interview.
I most certainly will. We shall come to both those things very shortly. Andrew, you're really the defender of aid here, so pushing off against two others. I'm not going to ask you to defend literally every article you've written since 2010, but the charges here, I suppose, are that aid is inefficiently spent, not transparent enough, and doesn't do enough good on the ground. I mean, which bits of that would you push back against most vociferously?
Well, let me try and confront directly what Ian said. I mean, Ian, who I count as a friend, and I have been arguing about this for at least 15 years, and I think our relative positions have changed very little in that time. Now, let me start with China, because China is wheeled out as a very good example of Britain wasting money. On the first day, in the first hour, I think, that I had the privilege of taking office in DFID, I stopped all checks to China. I said that DFID would no longer give any money to China unless it was legally, contractually due. We simply weren't going to do it. China was powering out of poverty. It was an emerging superpower, and we shouldn't do it. If you look on the website, you will see that DFID doesn't give any money to China. It's the Foreign Office that gives money to China. And it is for the Foreign Office to defend this use of money, which I think is grotesque and wrong, in using British taxpayers' money in China when they shouldn't be. I invite you to invite on a Foreign Office minister to explain this waste. But it's not from DFID. If you look on the website, DFID is the most transparent, or was the most transparent department in Whitehall. It put all its expenditure over £500 onto the internet, and it was well known in the Treasury that if you wanted real rigor and value for money if it was right at the top of the list. Now, let me just go to a couple of other points that that Ian made. I mean, he suggested there was a sort of neo-colonial approach to Somalia, and that it was us doing things to them and patting ourselves on the back for it. Nothing could be further from the truth. Development policy in Somalia was designed to make sure that we helped make them less conflict-ridden and more prosperous, and that in turn makes us less conflict-ridden and indeed more prosperous for the reasons I set out earlier. And we were working with such voluntary and civil society organisations as we could in Somalia, certainly not with the government for all the reasons that Ian suggested. And as I say, don't shout it too loudly. Somalia is actually much better today, and it's better precisely because the opposite of what Ian said is true, that you've got us working in partnership with other countries, other people, local organisations, local government, such as it exists in Somalia. And because you have a partnership where you're all pulling in the same direction, you can do an awful lot better. And the point about North Korean officials, I think there's some merit, actually, in trying to make sure that North Korean officials respect human rights more, have a little bit more care for those who they interact with, ordinary people who they deal with. But, of course, Britain gives no money at all direct to North Korea. There are some United Nations programme, which Britain partly funds, but only funds if we think they give good value for money and if we think they are acting in Britain's interests, because those are the rules by which British development money is spent in the multilateral system, only indirectly through those UN organisations. And if we approve of what they're trying to do, would we ever allow British money to be spent in that way?
Sure. Thank you. Okay, well, we've only got 7 or 8 minutes left. I want to get on to the idea of whether we ought to be time for all this. But Andrew Mitchell, just before we go, sell us quickly on the idea of why it is that aid should be tied to national income rather than just we give a lump sum of the right amount that we think is enough to do the things we want to do. Why the link to our own income?
Well, first of all, the point 7 was a manifesto commitment. Every single member of Parliament, apart, I think, from the DUP, was elected on the promise that we would stand by our commitments on the point 7. And as the Archbishop of Canterbury said yesterday, the promise to the poorest is a sacred thing, and people should not break their promises. I think for politicians who deliberately break a solemn promise to the poorest people in the world, there is reserved a particularly hot place in hell. And secondly, the point 7 goes up and down with the economy, so that as the economy has contracted this year by a terrible 11%. So 2.9 billion has already been taken out of the budget. And, at this time, when COVID will only be beaten here when it is beaten everywhere, the British development budget has helped build public health systems in the poorest parts of the world. And it will have to be reined in now. The effect of the 30% cut is that 1 million girls will not now go to school. 7.6 million fewer girls and women will get access to contraception. The food will come off 2 million plates of the poorest in the world, and 5.6 million fewer children will be vaccinated, leading to 105,000 avoidable deaths. That is the effect of this cut in the British aid promise. It's going to affect us very little. It's going to affect the poorest people in the world enormously. It's wrong, and it should not be done. And I very much hope the House of Commons will confront the government about this and tell the government, no, you've got to stand by your promise, stand by your commitment, and we won't accept this.
Well, look, thank you very much to my 3 guests. I think we could have kept